It was a calm Saturday afternoon in Oak Ridge Estates, the kind of suburban neighborhood where lawns are trimmed to antiseptic perfection, and neighbors wave politely from their porches while secretly watching each other through the slats of Venetian blinds. The air hummed with the distant, hypnotic whir of a lawnmower, and the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming jasmine lay heavy and sweet. It was a portrait of curated peace, a bubble of order insulated from the chaos of the world beyond its manicured borders. But peace shattered that day at 3:17 p.m., when Jason Miller, a 32-year-old firefighter, guided his dust-streaked Ford F-150 into the driveway of 1247 Willow Lane. He was bone-tired, his muscles aching with familiar fatigue from a grueling 48-hour shift that had included a 3-alarm warehouse fire. All he could think about was a cold beer, the embrace of his worn-out recliner, and the sound of his kids' laughter when they got home from the park with his wife. The simple, earned comforts of home. He had just shifted the truck into park, the engine ticking as it cooled, when a woman materialized from the house next door. She was in her late 40s, dressed in immaculate athleisure wear, and she stormed toward his driver's side door with a purpose that brooked no argument. Her phone was already clutched in her hand, not as a communication device, but as a weapon of documentation and authority. "Excuse me, you can't park here," she shouted, her voice slicing through the afternoon tranquility like broken glass. Jason blinked, the weariness in his brain slowing his processing speed. He rolled down the window, the electric hum sounding overly loud. "I live here. That's my house," he replied, his voice a low, gravelly rumble as he gestured with a thumb toward the beige 2-story colonial behind him, the house he and Sarah had scraped and saved for. The house with the small, lopsided clay pot his daughter had made in art class sitting on the front porch step. The woman, Karen Thompson, the self-appointed and fiercely committed chairperson of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, planted her sneakers firmly on the asphalt and crossed her arms. A tight, disapproving smile played on her lips. "Don't lie to me. I know everyone in this neighborhood, and you're not one of them. This is a private community. We have standards." The words, "you're not one of them," hung in the air. Jason knew what they meant. He saw the flicker of her eyes over his profile, taking in his broad shoulders, his close-cropped hair, the faint soot smudge on his jaw he'd missed in the station's locker room mirror. In her world of polo shirts and khaki shorts, he was an anomaly. He'd heard stories like this before, subtle glances at grocery stores, security guards trailing him in department malls. But having it happen on his own property, a place he fought literal fires to afford, sent a fresh wave of cold frustration through his veins. It stung, deeply and personally, every single time. He took a deep, measured breath, the kind he was trained to take before entering a smoke-filled room. Calm was a choice. Without a word, he pulled his keychain from the cup holder. It was a simple, unassuming gesture, but it held the weight of truth. He clicked the small, black garage door opener. With a mechanical groan, the white panel door began to ascend, rolling up on its tracks to reveal the heart of his domestic life. There were his well-organized tools hanging on pegboard. His mountain bike, with a slightly flat tire, leaned against the wall. A bright red plastic tricycle lay on its side next to a deflated soccer ball. This wasn't just a garage. It was a gallery of his world, of Saturday projects, family bike rides, and chaotic play. For a moment, Jason hoped the sight would be enough, that the evidence of his life would dissolve her suspicion. But Karen Thompson's resolve did not waver. Her eyes narrowed, not in reconsideration, but in triumph, as if she had caught him in an even more elaborate lie. "You must have stolen that remote," she declared, her voice dripping with certainty. Her thumbs began to dance across her phone screen, her posture rigid with self-righteous indignation. "I'm not debating this with you. I'm calling the police." And with that, the quiet hum of the suburb was replaced by the tense, silent standoff between a man at his own home and a woman utterly convinced she was defending her fortress from an intruder. The stage was set not for a battle of fists, but for a far more modern and insidious conflict, one of identity, perception, and the painful price of belonging. The click of Karen's phone dialing seemed to echo in the suddenly still air. She quickly punched in 911, pacing tight, agitated circles on the immaculate pavement, as if she just cornered a dangerous criminal, not a tired man in his own driveway. "Hello? Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious man trespassing in Oak Ridge Estates, she announced, her voice sharp and carrying. She shot a triumphant glare toward Jason's truck. He's parked in a driveway and is refusing to leave a property that isn't his. He's being very confrontational. Jason leaned against the warm metal of his truck, the heat of the engine seeping through his jeans. He crossed his arms, a weary sigh escaping his lips. The initial sting of the confrontation was cooling into a hard, heavy lump of resignation in his gut. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and firm, cutting through a performance. "I told you, I live here. You're making a very serious mistake." But Karen was in her element now, buoyed by the authority on the other end of the line. She turned her back to him, cupping her hand around the phone as if sharing a state secret. "He's just standing there, intimidating me," she whispered loudly into the receiver. What Karen, in her fervent certainty, could never have known was that the dispatcher on the other end, a woman named Tanya Miller with a voice as calm and steady as a metronome, was Jason's wife. At first, Tanya's training took over. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, her tone impeccably professional, a soothing counterpoint to Karen's hysteria. "Okay, ma'am, I need you to take a breath. Can you describe the situation clearly for me? Is anyone armed or making direct threats?" "He's not armed, but he's clearly unstable." Karen's tone grew shriller, embellishing the story now that she had a captive audience. "He's a tall, well-built black man, and he's just glaring at me. He tried to claim he lives here by opening the garage. You need to send someone immediately, before he does something. I feel threatened." On her end, Tanya's professional composure didn't crack, but her mind was racing. A tall black man at her address? Her husband was due home. As Karen continued her frantic narration, Tanya's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the caller's information and cross-referencing the address. The data populated on her screen, 1247 Willow Lane. Her own address. Her breath hitched. "That's my house." Her heart, which had been beating a steady, professional rhythm, suddenly slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. The sterile, air-conditioned air the dispatch center felt thin, suffocating. She checked the caller ID, Karen Thompson, and the address again. There was no mistake. The blood drained from her face, a cold dread washing over her, quickly followed by a white-hot surge of protective fury. Someone had just called 911 on her husband, at their home, where their children slept and played. She took a sharp, controlled breath, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of her console. The professional protocol that was her second nature now felt like a straitjacket. Every instinct screamed to shout into the microphone, "That's my husband, you lunatic!" But she didn't. Instead, her voice, when she spoke again, was clipped, layered with new, icy intensity that the caller was too self-absorbed to notice. "Unit 7, Adam 4, respond to 1247 Willow Lane, Oak Ridge Estates, for a reported trespasser," she said into her headset, her voice betraying none of the tempest raging inside her. She was dispatching the police to her own home, to investigate her own husband as a criminal, all based on the prejudiced panic of a woman who saw a man where she expected to see a ghost. The sterile, air-conditioned air of the dispatch center felt thin in Tanya's lungs. Every instinct screamed at her to abandon protocol, to shout into the microphone, "Leave my husband alone!" But years of training held firm. Her voice, when she spoke again into the line connected to Karen, was a masterclass in controlled professionalism, layered over a foundation of cold, simmering fury. "Ma'am, please step back from the individual and maintain a safe distance. Officers are en route to your location," Tanya said, her words measured and clear. It was a standard script, but every syllable felt like a betrayal. Simultaneously, her fingers flew across a separate keyboard, pulling up the internal messaging system for her colleagues. She typed a swift, urgent message to the patrol units being dispatched, her text a stark contrast to her placid tone. "Unit 7 Adam, 4 Unit 7 Adam, 5, be advised. Do not escalate at 1247 Willow Lane. That's my husband. He lives there. Situation is likely a profiling incident." Back on Willow Lane, the standoff had settled into a tense tableau. Karen, emboldened by the promise of arriving authority, had her phone held aloft, recording Jason with the dramatic flair of a documentarian in a war zone. "Just look at him," she narrated in a hushed, theatrical voice, panning her camera from Jason's work boots to his weary face. Completely brazen. Just sitting there, pretending this is his home. Classic scammer behavior, waiting for a family to be away. Jason had given up on reasoning with her. He simply sat on his own front porch step, the cool concrete a stark reality against the heat of injustice. The weight of his fatigue felt heavier than any piece of equipment he'd carried at the fire. "You could have just asked my name," he said, his voice flat. "I've lived here for 5 years. My wife and kids are inside napping." He gestured to the upstairs window, where the curtains of his children's room were drawn. But Karen was no longer listening. She was rehearsing her victim speech to the police, muttering to herself, "I'm just doing my duty as HOA president. We can't let strangers just walk around freely. Property values, community safety." She had built a whole narrative in her head, and Jason was merely the antagonist she had cast. A few minutes later, a patrol car slid quietly to the curb, its lights off. 2 officers, a seasoned veteran and a younger rookie, stepped out. Their body language was immediately noticeable. They lacked the usual assertive stride. They had received the message. They looked uneasy, their eyes flicking from the frantic white woman with the phone to the calm black man sitting on his own porch. "Ma'am," the veteran officer began, his voice carefully neutral. "Are you the one who called? Is this the person you reported?" "Yes." "Finally," Karen exclaimed, lowering her phone as if sheathing a sword. "Arrest him. He's trespassing. He's been harassing me, and I have it all on video." The officer didn't move. He looked at Jason, who met his gaze steadily, then back at Karen. "Ma'am, we've confirmed this man's identity. He lives here. This is his residence." The words landed on Karen like a physical blow. She froze, her mouth slightly agape. That can't be right. There must be some mistake. Wordlessly, Jason stood and handed his driver's license to the officer. The veteran glanced at it, nodded, and handed it back. "It's all in order." "Told you," Jason said, his voice still calm, but the 2 words carried the weight of 1,000 frustrations. At that moment, the static crackle of the police radio cut through the tension. A voice came through. Tanya's voice, calm but firm, her personal message now entering the official record for all to hear. "Dispatch to 7 Adam 4. Confirmed situation resolved at 1247 Willow Lane. Negative on the trespasser. That's my husband. Thank you, officers." The blood drained from Karen's face, leaving her pale and utterly deflated. The phone, her weapon of choice, hung limply at her side. The HOA president, the self-appointed guardian of the community, had not only been wrong, she had been publicly, humiliatingly, and definitively unmasked. The facade of her perfect neighborhood had cracked, revealing an ugly truth she could no longer ignore. For a long, suspended moment, Karen Thompson was utterly speechless. The smug certainty that had armored her just seconds before evaporated, leaving her face slack with dawning horror. Her phone, once wielded like a scepter of authority, now dangled uselessly from her fingers as the full, crushing weight of reality settled upon her. She had not just been mistaken. She had called 911 on her own neighbor, a homeowner, and had described him as a criminal to his own wife. The perfectly ordered world she believed she presided over had just collapsed into a humiliating paradox. "Wait," she finally managed, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. She looked from Jason to the now-departed police car and back again, the pieces finally clicking into a devastating picture. "Your wife is—" "Yeah," Jason said, standing up from the porch step. He didn't advance toward her, but his simple, solid presence seemed to fill the space. "The dispatcher you told I was dangerous and unstable. That's Tanya, the same woman who sends me texts to be safe when I'm pulling people out of burning buildings. She's the one who listened to you describe me, her husband, as a threat in our own driveway." He let that hang in the air, the suburban quiet now feeling accusatory. "Funny world, huh? The person you see as a trespasser is the same one the city pays to run into places everyone else is running out of. The two officers, before departing, had tried to impart a final, crucial lesson. The veteran officer, his voice low but firm, had said, "Ma'am, you might want to offer a sincere apology. I need you to understand something. This situation, based on your description over the phone, could have escalated very, very differently. You are very fortunate it did not." The unspoken words. Fortunate he was so calm. Fortunate we got the message. Fortunate we didn't come in hot. Echoed in the ensuing silence. Karen stammered, her eyes wide with a defensive, flailing panic. I just thought I was trying to protect the neighborhood. Jason didn't let her finish the hollow justification. His voice remained even, a deep, calm river cutting through her sputtering. "That didn't belong here," he finished for her, his gaze steady and direct. "That's what you thought. That's what this was always about. Not a stolen garage remote. Not a parked truck. You looked at me and your first thought was that I was out of place." He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The quiet, unassailable truth in his words hit with more force than any shout ever could. It stripped away the pretense of HOA rules and community standards, exposing the raw, uncomfortable bias at the core of her actions. There was no bylaws committee to appeal to, no fine she could levy to make this right. The officers, seeing the confrontation had reached its natural, damning conclusion, offered a final nod to Jason and left. The crunch of their tires on the pavement faded, leaving Karen and Jason alone in the driveway once more, but the dynamic had been irrevocably shattered. Karen stood frozen for another moment, a statue of deflated self-importance. The fight had drained completely out of her. There were no more lectures, no more rehearsed speeches about property values. The authority she had cloaked herself in was gone, leaving behind only a profound and awkward silence. Without another word, without even meeting his eyes, she turned and walked stiffly back toward her own property. Her retreat was not the strategic withdrawal of a dignitary, but the quiet, shameful escape of someone who had been seen, truly seen, for who they were. She didn't head for a front door, but instead slid into the driver's seat of her own car, perhaps needing a metal box to hide in, to process the utter ruin of her afternoon and the uncomfortable mirror that had been held up to her life. The late evening sun cast long, golden shadows across the lawn of 1247 Willow Lane, painting the scene in hues of amber and peace. Tanya, still in her comfortable dispatch center scrubs, finally arrived home, the weight of the day's surreal injustice lifting as she saw her family. She and Jason sat side by side on the porch steps, a silent understanding passing between them as they watched their children chase fireflies in the deepening twilight. This was their kingdom, the same yard, the same porch, the same home that Karen Thompson had so vehemently claimed Jason did not belong in just hours before. "You okay?" Tanya asked softly, her hand finding his, their fingers intertwining. Jason let out a long, slow breath, his gaze fixed on their laughing daughter. "Yeah," he said, the word heavy with a meaning that went far beyond the simple affirmation. "I'm just tired. Not from the 48-hour shift. Not from the fire. I'm tired from proving I belong." Over and over again. Word, as it does in places like Oak Ridge Estates, spread with a quiet, viral efficiency. It wasn't on the official HOA email blast, but it was the main topic whispered over backyard fences and at the community mailboxes. The story of the HOA president and the firefighter became the talk of the town, not because Jason had made a scene or shouted back, but precisely because he hadn't. His profound calm, his weary dignity in the face of such blatant prejudice, had exposed something much deeper and more uncomfortable than a simple case of mistaken identity. It held up a mirror to the community, and many didn't like the reflection they saw. A few days later, as Jason was grilling burgers on the patio, a figure appeared at the edge of his property line. It was Karen. This time, there was no phone held aloft, no storming approach, no armor of self-righteousness. She stood awkwardly, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sweater, looking more like a chastised child than a formidable neighborhood enforcer. She waited until Jason noticed her and gave a hesitant nod of permission to approach. I came to apologize," she said, her voice so quiet it was almost carried away by the breeze. She couldn't quite meet his eyes, instead focusing on the vibrant green grass of his lawn, the very lawn she had accused him of trespassing on. I was wrong, not just about the facts, but in my heart. I judged you before I even asked your name. I saw what I was afraid of, not who you were, and I am so very sorry. Jason closed the lid of the grill, giving her his full attention. He saw the genuine shame in her posture, the absence of her previous bluster. I appreciate that, he said, his voice neutral but not unkind. Thank you for saying it. Tanya, who had been watching from porch, walked over and stood beside her husband, a united front. She offered a faint, conciliatory smile. We all make mistakes, Karen. What matters isn't the mistake itself, but what we learn from it. From that day on, a subtle but significant shift occurred in Oak Ridge Estates. Karen's transformation was the most visible. The nitpicking HOA violation notices for trash cans being out an hour too long ceased. Her interactions with other neighbors, especially those who didn't fit a certain mold, became less about enforcement and more about connection. The story of the HOA Karen and the firefighter became a quiet, cautionary legend, a lesson discussed in hushed, meaningful tones at block parties and community meetings about the true cost of assumptions and the meaning of community. Sometimes it takes being publicly and profoundly exposed to finally see yourself clearly. The facade has to crack for the light to get in. And sometimes karma has the most impeccable, poetic sense of timing, especially when the person you call 911 on for being suspicious and out of place is married to the calm, professional voice on the other end of the line, the very person who holds the power to define the narrative of the crisis you created.